Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, positive psychologist, author, and filmmaker, along with her colleague, Debbie Storz Higgins, film critic, director, and producer, have designed a treat for you. Want to be uplifted? Taken back to happy and pleasant memories from a saner time? Then sit back, relax, and listen to Dr. Barbara and Debbie as they explore from their past everything fit to print that is funny, uplifting, and even miraculous.
I'm Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, and I am back with my colleague, Debbie Storz. I wrote it right this time, Debbie.
I know.
And we are here to invite you to Old Time Radio. This is our show, it's Old Time Radio, and we go back in the past, we go into adventures, we go into parts of our lives that are fit to print, we go into humor and scariness, and this is Halloween month, so you might be a little scared up your spine when we get going with a couple of stories. And we never run out of anything to talk about. So some of you may have seen our last show where we actually finally had something absolutely hysterical happen. And we got such a kick out of it. Where is your cat tonight?
I don't know where she is, but she's been in here a lot because the chair in here that I just recovered is filled with cat hair. So
okay.
I think she's sleeping on my bed in the other room.
Okay.
Maybe she's scared because we're doing a Halloween show.
Yes, she may be scared.
Right. She's
and yes, and we had such a laugh. I cleared out all my internal organs with that laugh when the cat's tail was doing a dance that
it was like duck shoot. I call it duck shoot. An old duck shoot.
And it was hilarious. And she had probably a more important message to serve than we had. So
well, I'm going to try to just muddle through because I usually have my White Russian here to drink for our show, but I forgot to bring it upstairs. Today's my birthday, and we just went out, and I could give a plug to Cousin's Restaurant in Manalapan, or Marlboro, which is probably the best seafood restaurant I've ever eaten in, except for Lobarno down in New York, which is phenomenal. But I don't have my drink because we ate so much that I came up and I forgot my drink. So there we go.
All right.
Off to the show.
We had several themes that we thought about talking about, and one of them is tied into fairy tales and books we've read and how they influence us and what they have meant to us. And I could just say that for me, I loved fairy tales. And unfortunately, I think in terms of really being a woman in our culture, they didn't always have the best effect because I believed a lot of the stuff when I was little. I believed, like a lot of my friends, I think believed that we were going to be swept away by an extremely handsome fellow that was going to find us. And we almost felt like he really would come in on a white, beautiful horse. And I don't know, I mean, it was all mixed up with the images of the fairy tales, or we'd be, someone would kiss us and our world would change. Now, I think in reality, we knew our lives were going to be more like we saw in our real world. We knew we weren't going to live in a castle. But I think the negative part was that we over-expected what others would offer us in life. And when you marry someone or have a relationship with someone, it's hard work. And you have to learn how to adapt. Well, that never really happened in the fairy tales. So I think it's something that, well, it's part of our culture, and I enjoyed them as children, so be it. And I discovered that we're all human as I grew up, and um, I knew when I met my husband, well, I had this, okay, talk about psychic things. When I met my husband, it was a fix-up, and he walked into the apartment I lived with my two girlfriends. We were going for our masters at Boston University. And in my head, I've told this a million times, but I think it's interesting, a little bit psychic. A voice in my head said, "You're not going to believe this, but you will marry him someday." And I did. And I don't know where that voice came from, but it's possible that my unconscious was sizing up, something. Yeah, I think you can pick up a lot of subtleties from people that you really don't know how to put into words. Or maybe I was slightly desperate because I had turned 22. Maybe that was part of it. And I was, what was in my head was that we were supposed to get married around that age.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It was a big deal.
So, what do you want me to talk about right now? How I felt about fairy tales, or books or films that influenced me? Pick a subject.
Well, I wanted you to reveal something since I just revealed something.
Well, I believed in fairies because I had a grandmother who was very magical, and the woods behind her house were, it was an amazing forest. And she knew every plant and everything, and she would tell us about fairy rings. And if people don't know, in Ireland, a fairy ring is like a ring of rocks or a ring around the trees that at night the fairies come out and they do a dance at night when no one can see them. And kind of like the fairies in Walt Disney's Fantasia. And we truly believed that 100%. But when it came to men, more than fairy tales, I was influenced by the movies that I saw as a kid. Now, the movies were all in theaters in the 30s and 40s, but when TV started, it needed product. So all those movies were on TV all the time during the day. Cary Grant, Tyrone Power, these gorgeous guys, Randolph Scott, Alan Ladd, Gary Cooper, and they were always bad boys. But at the end, the girl had all this tussling with them. But at the end, it was like this giant love affair that just was unsurmountable, or it could be surmounted, I guess. I don't even know if I'm using the proper grammar. But I believe that's what life was like. And in a way, it was like that in my marriage. I mean, I met my husband, and he was kind of a bad boy, and he became the best husband in the world. But I had always believed in that giant, sweeping, every woman in the world wanted him, and he was bad, but you could tame him because his love was just unbridled. And that was my thinking. And to segue into books, I love D.H. Lawrence. And I read Satterley's Lover and Sons and Lovers. And I read all those, I guess, kind of bodice ripping, but great literature also. They weren't like these supermarket paperbacks. They were great literature. So that influenced me a lot. That was
you're making me think of a lot of other influences. And I was very influenced by certain songs. And one of them was Kismet, the play Kismet, and the music that went with it. Oh, I forgot before that, I want to mention that when I was little, somewhere between about 7 and 9, I had a song in my head that was very, very uplifting to me. And it had no words, but it had that kind of sweep that is almost sexual. You know how certain music takes you to certain erotic levels somehow. And I remember saying to my mother, we were in Washington, D.C. on a vacation, whether singing the song to her. Well, I tried. Of course, it came out totally muddled because there were no words and I was just trying to get the melody out. At that point, maybe I was 9-ish, and then the song disappeared. It left. And I always wondered whether I was just a very peculiar child, but I did have one little girl in my practice who said this, she had a song and then it left when she was 10 or 11. So that's as far as the information on that. But when I heard Kismet, it got me very stirred up in ways I didn't really understand. And it's something about the notes going from low to high. And I still don't fully understand what combination of notes, but believe me, there is some. So after Kismet, maybe I was a little bit older, 12, 13, I was insanely in love with Unchained Melody.
Oh.
I would play it over and over and over on the record player. And then I would lie on the couch in the living room.
Swooning.
You know, it's like the sense of mystery and depth of connection between people that had been withheld from me in my whole childhood. It's like there was going to be something behind this curtain that was going to finally open up, you know, and I was I have to say, I was mad for it. I wanted to enter this other stage that I didn't really understand, although my girlfriends and I spent a whole year talking about what we thought was everything about being a grown-up. And when we weren't calling and ordering pizzas for families we didn't know to be delivered to their homes, you know,
yeah, that's
really on that line of childhood and early teenagehood. And I did have what I would do. I tried to smoke. You know, smoking was very common, much more common than today.
right.
And I would go into my bedroom and lock the door, and I'd have a cigarette with me, sit on the bed, thinking about, again, these illusions of getting older and so on. And I'd take 1 or 2 puffs and I'd have just a very good choking cough and I'd put it out, you know. But
So for 2 seconds, you were Greta Garbo.
yes, yes. And then I had some sort of book under the bed.
Uh-oh.
I don't remember what it was. It could have been, well, it was something I wasn't supposed to have under the bed. And we had a cleaning man at that time once in a while. And one day I came home and I went into my bedroom and the book was on top of the mattress.
Uh-oh.
You know, he had obviously turned over the mattress and left it, I don't think cruelly, just he thought he found it and maybe I had forgotten it was under there.
Do you remember what the book was, or can't you say it? I had a book like that too.
Yeah, I'm not sure because it was something, you know, what I shouldn't have had it. I don't know whether one of my girlfriends lent it to me or whatever, but.
Well, I had the story of O.
Oh,
Yes.
O.
That was a big sensational book.
Yes.
Another one called Poor Cow. And I've just been cleaning out our family home and I found my book, Poor Cow. So I'm going to reread it. And the last time I read it was in about 6th grade. And we were all a titter after reading that. It was passed around
Sure.
6th grade. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, really, you know, that was, of course, you know, is another thing that kind of segues into young adulthood that we used to sit on the sink in grammar school and stuff our little training bras with toilet paper so that we looked like Dolly Parton, you know, and that was in school. And that was fun until we sat on the sink and it fell off the wall and the nuns went crazy. They went bananas, but they really didn't know what we were doing. They just knew we were sitting on the sink. But
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I think about it, there were so many streams that really influenced me, one of them being fairy tales, one of them being music, And of course, the movies.
Right.
And the movies made me feel that absolutely romantic love was, that was it. You know, that's what happened. You had romantic love, and anything else was, you didn't quite get there. Something like that. Again, I don't really think any of these things clearly prepared me for growing up. They're just the, you know, the atmosphere. The atmosphere was created. And if my parents, particularly my dad, had not been extremely concerned that women were being cheated out of opportunities, that was really one of his streams of life work, I'm not sure that I would have moved ahead in my career. I might have been a teacher. I don't think I ever would have moved to be a psychologist. I don't think I ever would have had the courage to be a filmmaker and do all sorts of other things. But his attitude was so insistent that women needed to have careers, go for what they love to do, not depend just on their husbands. And I would say he would even say it was okay if you didn't marry. Although that was part of the culture, you know.
Right, of course.
So that would be, but he was really amazing. And coming from a immigrant home, he was the only child out of 4 even born in this country. To have such high hopes and beliefs about what women could achieve. And I may have told this little story. You know, now we've done so many shows, we're gonna have to categorize what we talk about.
Yeah, right?
My mother came from a family where her great uncle, my great uncle, her uncle, who was kind of head of the family, had said to her, you're going to graduate high school. You have 2 choices. You can either go to work in the major department store in Boston, Filene, no, yeah, I think it was Filene.
Yeah.
And be a clerk or sales lady, or I'll pay for you to go 6 months to Catherine Gibbs. And of course she chose that,
school.
But she was 18. And then by the time she was 19, she was married to my father. So you can certainly see that she wasn't really happy with either choice.
Right.
And since the relatives, someone in the family had said to her, maybe more than once, you're beautiful but dumb, her aspirations were pretty low. And one of the first things my father did in their marriage was he was a guidance counselor at that point. He brought home an IQ test and made her take it.
Oh, Lord.
And she was amazed. She had a very good IQ, really. And certainly with no help from her family, except they lived a decent, normal, middle-class life, but nobody was pushing her to do anything.
Yeah.
And made a big difference in the way she perceived herself. So I was we were all so proud of her because she even got a master's in education. She just kept going. She became the Energizer Bunny once she realized her own potential.
And like, you know, my mother, I was never raised that I would ever have to work. But, and my father never talked about women, you know, in the workplace, because my mother, I just found the scrapbook today. My mother at 22 years old was the fashion editor of the New York Times.
Oh my God.
22.
That's a big job.
Amazing. And she also was the youngest graduate of Columbia University. So she was recruited. So, I mean, she was a big career woman, and my mother was funny when she got older and she couldn't remember that well. She always said she gave up her career and she retired in like the 90s or something. But reading her diary every day, it was like when she was 30, she stopped working. So it was funny, you know, her memory, how it went at the end, and she just thought she worked longer than she did, you know. But what other what other movies, not about romance, but big films that you saw when you were younger influenced you?
Well,
Did you
the Ten Commandments did to some extent. I think even though I was young, I realized it was overdone. I really couldn't imagine, you know, Moses looking exactly like they dressed him. And I was always offended in these great old movies if the women looked like they had lipstick on, you know, like, how did they do that 2,000 years ago? Although I know that the wealthy and the princes and the princesses and the queens did have access to different compounds that worked as cosmetics, but it really took away a lot of the grandeur to try to do that to the actors and actresses.
Right.
That was powerful. And you go ahead. Maybe you will trigger me.
Well, I had two movies that, well, first of all, I had a movie that really influenced me, and a lot of people will have this as a reference, was Jaws. Because when Jaws was in the movie industry, it coined the term blockbuster. There were lines around the block. It terrified me for the rest of my life, just swimming in the ocean. And on so many levels, it was just an incredible film. And I did my paper, one of my final papers at film school on Jaws. Two other movies that influenced me very much. One was called The Curse of the Cat People. And although it sounds like a horror movie, and it was the sequel, Val Lewton's sequel to Cat People, which was kind of a horror movie, it's the best coming of age children's movie that I know of. It's just phenomenal. And if no one's seen it, it's a black and white, beautiful, beautiful coming of age children's story about a lonely child and her imagination and living in a town with big houses. And the saga and story of the Headless Horseman is in there, told in the best way possible. And another movie that influenced me was called The List of Adrian Messenger, which influenced me so much that I named my son after the boy in the movie, and I named my farm that I had after the estate in the film. Fantastic movie, big cast. It's a mystery, as Kirk Douglas, Robert Mitchum, Tony Curtis, Frank Sinatra, Burt Lancaster, George C. Scott, you name it. And List of Adrian Messenger is it's amazing film, and I try to tell people about it as much as I can so that they experience it. So those were two movies that really popped into my head when we thought of this subject, you know.
Well, I'm thinking about Walt Disney, and I really enjoyed a lot of his movies, but the one that really frightened me to the point of feeling weird inside almost when I saw it was Alice in Wonderland, because there were so many, there were strange animals and creatures, and things were bigger than they should have been or smaller than they should have been. It was for the script, but I found it very scary, and actually also found the Headless Horseman, I don't know if that was Walt Disney or not, very scary. And believe it or not, I found cartoons very scary.
Oh, they are threatening. They always.
Yeah, I didn't like that they would always, punch someone and then he would dissolve and come back, and it was a little bit much for my taste, and I have found that the 360 stuff headphones that you can now put on, where you can be in Africa and see all around.
Yeah, like a virtual reality thing.
Virtual reality isn't for me. It's
too weird.
I think that
I don't like technology, so I like reality,
Yeah, it's too much for me.
Mm-hmm.
As far as books, now that was another thing I hadn't put on the list, but I was an avid reader. Life was full for me with books. They really, really enriched me. And I took them very, very seriously.
Barbara, did you read the Nancy Drew mysteries?
Did I read them? Yes. And I owned probably 20 or 30. I think they're actually still in the attic, but they're going to be too dusty and moldy for any purpose at this point.
They were wonderful.
But you will enjoy this, Black Beauty.
Okay. Oh, Anna Sewell.
I read Black Beauty and I cried for two nights, and my father and mother tried to pull me together. I was like a wreck.
Yeah.
It touched me so much. It was so beautiful. And I think in the end, doesn't he get to live on a farm or somewhere?
Yeah. Well, they all pretty much are like that. Even Smokey the Cowhorse, Thunderhead. Speaking of that, I was always a horse maniac.
Yeah.
And every time I see Thunderhead and he takes his halter off and lets him free, I sit there and I cry like I'm 4 years old.
Yeah.
Animal story. Old Yeller, my God. Disney's Old Yeller about the dog, and they had to go shoot him because he had oh my God, you know. Well, even Dumbo, the little elephant cartoon.
Oh, yes.
So upsetting, you know.
Yeah, and I guess it's good for kids. They build some fiber, some emotional fiber, getting through some of this stuff. I guess.
Well, we're going to talk about it is Halloween show.
Yes.
Let's get into some psychic moments where you felt something psychic going on. Can you talk about something like that?
Yes, I can. Well, I have already shared one, which changed my life in marrying somebody. I shouldn't say somebody, Russell. Okay, you've met Russell. He's a very lovable man, and he, it's been good. So anyway, I had something happen after my father died. And what happened was, it was about a year after he died, or a year and a half. And I was asked to speak to a group of women who were all healers in any fashion, like masseuses, even in sports, teaching women in athletic settings like the gym, social workers, a few psychologists. And these women would meet once a month in a library that was about 20 miles from here. So I went and I talked about my concept of enchanted self and looking and finding not only the best of yourself, but having enhanced moments and knowing how to make your life pleasant and uplifting. And okay, this went on, and I had just written a little storybook of stories that I dedicated to my father. So I talked just a tiny bit about him. And afterwards, there was a room we went to, and there were women asking me, one or two bought a book from me, and I was the star, you know, and that lasted about 30 minutes, and then they were all going to start to leave. So I picked up all my papers and stuff, and I got in the car, and I started back down Route 18. Well, I was almost at Route 18 to come home, and I realized I had left a pile of papers and photographs from my workshops that I used to do. And it's just such a nuisance to call a place and then have them have to send it, or I have to drive back. So I turned around and I went back. Got out of my car. I'm going toward the back of the library, and the back door was still open, and there was a big, tall woman, and I'm 5'7"ish. I'm not short. She was tall. And she came towards me and she said, "Oh, thank God you're back. Your father visited me while you were talking." And I said, "Oh," you know, I was really kind of astounded. And she said, "Yes." So I said the natural thing. I said, "So what did he say?" You know? And she said, "Well, first of all, He's fine and he's very happy. It's just beautiful where he is. Don't worry about him. But he did have a message. I said, okay, what was the message? And she said, the message was, you were right. And that was it. I went in, I got my papers, and I started home. And you know, when you're kind of in an altered state, you almost feel like you're flying on top of your head or something. You know, I was trying to figure this out. And what I came up with was two things. One was that I had been studying Judaism for really the first time in my life that I really had a teacher and was processing some of the major concepts. And I had always been a believer in some sort of heaven or afterlife, but was interested to know more. And I discovered in Judaism that there are actually 7 main concepts about heaven, and each one has its major points. I won't take you through them, but they're pretty well established through the centuries. And that was good. I felt happy about that. And my father and I would go for walks around here when he visited, and I tried to explain these concepts. And he was an atheist really at heart. So he would listen though, he's very courteous, and he would listen. He'd say, that's very interesting. And what else did you learn? You know, he was always the teacher, the listener. And so I thought perhaps he's thinking from heaven or wherever this is, that I was right, there is something. And the other thing was that he was the kind of person that would listen carefully and often say something like, wow, that's a wonderful idea. Maybe you're right about that, you know, to someone who brought up a new type of toilet or something. No matter what it was, that's the way he responded. So if I had to pick a saying by my father that was repetitive, that he often used, it's you're right.
Wow. There you go. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting. I have a lot of life changes going on with me. And I actually was and I'm not going to go into it, but making a decision that was probably the hardest in my life. It almost feels like another death. But I have a psychic, actually one of my best friends is a psychic, but she knows me too well. And another one that I contacted this week. And she not only tells you dates, things that are going to happen. I never ask her a question. She just tells me. But she said to me, I feel Saks Fifth Avenue. I don't know, Saks Fifth Avenue. And my mother her first thing she did was a model at Saks Fifth Avenue. And another psychic thing that happened to me was traveling to my second favorite city in the world, New Orleans. And when I got there, I knew where to go. I had been there before. Mm-hmm. It was weird, but I just knew which direction to go, what's down what street. Not like, you know, verbatim, like I had been there 50 times, but I felt this sense that I had lived there or been there. And I always feel that way. I tried to make a pilgrimage there about every 5 years at the longest. But it's very strange when you go to a place, and you know, and other things too. You can go to a place and you feel like you've been there and you know it, and you feel great. And then you can go into another place that's perfectly fine, and yet you have this horrible sense.
Yes.
I had that at Walmart this week. I said, I will never go in that store again. I didn't have any bad experience. I just had this creepy feeling, and watching everybody walking around like zombies with masks on, it just really, it made me feel really weird, and I never want to go back in again. But it's funny how, you know, and it's nothing to do with your childhood, because these things weren't even around when I was a child. But it's funny how this, probably a past life, maybe I do believe in past lives.
Well, I do too, yes.
Because there's something that makes it familiar. And yeah. So,
Yes, I I've had some similar experiences, and also there are shopping centers and stores that so give me the creeps. I've never ever been able to go back. I almost feel like I've got some sort of bad electricity that went through me or something.
Yeah. Do you have any around that we can talk about? Because I feel that way in
Oh,
Kohl's.
I'm afraid they'll sue me.
No, no, they're not going to.
Marshalls.
Oh, Marshalls. I'm that way with Kohl's. I hate
Yeah.
Kohl's.
Yeah.
I walk in and Target with the red circles and the red, I can't stand it. And those are two stores that, it's funny. Like, it's really weird why we feel that way. And other people feel great in them,
Yeah, yeah. I had an experience when I was in 3rd grade. A little girl came to the school, and we would line up, always lining up. And she and I thought we knew each other. We absolutely felt we knew each other. And as best we could, being 8-year-olds, but they're, 8-year-olds are pretty substantial. We would quiz each other, did you go here? Did you go to the circus last summer? Did you do this? Do you have any, we could never find any connection, but we were absolutely sure we knew each other.
Wow, that's really, and they also say you have a double somewhere on this planet.
Yes, I believe that too.
Yeah, totally crazy. So we're going to talk about, I have my little list here, Barbara, of the things you want to talk about. Do you have any scary stories? I have, a couple of them, but if you want to start with scary stories, like a scary thing for Halloween.
You go first.
Well, Halloween this year, my mother used to always get mad at me calling it Halloween. It's Halloween, so she correct me. But it seems like these kids aren't going to have much of a Halloween, and neither is anybody else. And it's my favorite holiday. Just for me to calm down, I put on a horror movie because it makes me feel like whatever they're going through is never as bad as what I'm going through. So it takes me into a different world. But before this house, I lived on a farm that was built in 1820, and I was the 3rd owner of it. And not only did it make it to an investigation because it was so haunted, but I will tell you, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye on my parents' grave, on the life of my son, that this is true, okay? It was a beautiful farmhouse. It was the DuPont Sons estate. It had 12-foot ceilings, a library with a ladder. It just was just an amazing, gorgeous place with horses. And supposedly, my son coming on the property, with going into puberty, which brings ghosts forward, and the fact that I had 2 horses, when they investigated it, supposedly it was an Indian shaman in the Lenni Lenape tribe that was run over and killed by 2 horses. But in the time we were there, we had a lady waving, which is a haunting, does the same thing. My electrician, Mr. Hosley from Allenhurst, was working on the hallway, and he was white as a ghost when I came home. And he said, I thought I saw you, but when I turned, it was another woman in a dress, and she just kept waving. So he left the house. He was so scared. There were voices at night. It sounded like a news anchor. And a lot of times I would get up to go downstairs thinking that my son put the TV on or we left it on, and it was nothing. There were knocks on the doors and the doors rattling. Down the basement, which was brick and dirt, the door down to the basement would bang, 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 bang on it. We had a toy that my son had that my friend had taken the batteries out of, and we didn't have batteries for it, and it was running with no batteries in it at all. Also, there were flames and cinders coming out of the fireplace with no fire on inside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was just constant poltergeistal activity. The kids were scared to death because when I'd have a sleepover, these things would happen and they'd all be running and screaming and coming in my room. But I always felt it was a very warm entity. It just was a very, not a threatening thing. So we actually had investigators there to look at the house that were legit. I don't know if you know about the Warrens at all, but you know, I mean, this was a real haunted house. And that was, you know, my scary story. I loved it. I miss it. Never scared me, but it was.
Did you have trouble selling it with this history?
No, we never said anything, but everybody experienced it. The kids did, my friends did. My friend, you know, Augie, he experienced it. It wasn't anything that you had to wait for. You could sit in the living room, you could hear a motor running, and yet you go outside and there was no motor. And then you come in the house and you'd hear a motor. It was like a chainsaw. But it felt protective. And, you know, it was a great, great house. It had history before.
Yes, yes. Well, we live in a fascinating house because, as I've talked, I think on another show, S.S. Adams, the joke manufacturer and the tricks and card tricks and things like that, I think he had 400 patents or maybe 600, I forget now. So we expected to find some, you know, scary type things maybe. We did find a joy buzzer and we found some fake money, but that was all we found, even though we were told there was money in a wall because he had had a fight with a son. And so the story was like he put cash somewhere just to play it, like his joke history. So someday maybe the son would find it or he wouldn't, you know. We never found it. But there were things that happened after, like when my father died, when Russell's mother died, there would be certain minor things like there's some extra noises. I think that kind of thing reflects the person you've lost. You know, that's the way I took it. Like a few months after my father passed, the clock in the living room, which hadn't been wound in 20 years, you know, was ticking for like an hour and a half.
Wow.
And just last summer, I had another clock that's part of a lady's statue, and then there's a clock in the middle, Victorian. We hardly ever wind it. And all of a sudden, it just was so busy clicking away. In fact, I recorded it on my phone.
Wow.
To have it, and then it stopped. So, you know, these are very, very subtle, very not scary really, because they're not repetitive, you know, but I do think that they indicated that we don't know everything. I believe we don't know. And years and years ago, not in my house, but as a therapist, a client had gone to see some sort of fortune teller and came back and said one of the things the fortune teller had said is, who is BH? Those are my initials, Barbara Holstein. But I guess he couldn't figure out, like I wasn't a cousin, I wasn't a father, I wasn't a boyfriend, you know, so why would she mention me?
Right, exactly.
So,
I had another weird thing happen. My husband died in 1985. And we lived at a farm in Lakewood, and I moved to Wanamassa. And I had to get up very early for my job. I worked then at the Postal Service, and I was the first one in the mornings. And I distinctly one morning when I was brushing my teeth, getting ready, I heard him say my name loud and clear. And it startled me. And I walked around the house. It was so weird. It was just so... It was loud. It wasn't like some ghostly whisper. I heard him say, Debbie. And then I went back to doing what I was doing and brushing my hair, whatever I had to do. And I heard it again, Debbie, distinctly. And I'll never forget that. And that was, I mean, I wasn't asleep. I wasn't overtired. I didn't have a hangover. I was, you know, bright as a bunny, sharp as a tack. And I heard him say
Yeah,
my name
yeah,
twice. He did.
yeah. But I think one of the most wonderful things as we move to end the show is not so much the sort of scary end of what we don't understand about life, really, when you get right down to it, but the synchronicity that saves us so many times in life that is beyond anything we could orchestrate. Like when I had major surgery many years ago, I was already in practice, and our house had doors in the wall, but they had never been pulled out, the sliding doors. And I didn't know I was going to need this surgery. A week before, maybe 2 weeks before I had the surgery, which was emergency surgery, a workman came and opened those doors between the rooms. We had talked about it, but we never had the right carpenter. It had to be someone who just knew how to do it.
Right.
You know, and he knew, and he did it. So because those doors were now open and the living room, the foyer, and the dining room could all be used as separate rooms, I continued my practice there when I was recovering. Not as many hours as I worked when I was well, but, you know, I saw a few clients every day kind of thing.
Right.
Now in the pandemic, well, before the pandemic, I was also seeing some people at night or in the early morning. Those doors were a lifesaver. And how do you explain they're ready when I didn't even know I would need them? I mean, you know, there's so many things like that. And I've told on the show already how we were in the motel with the bugs and everything. And then we ran into my son Justin's teacher, art teacher, and we ended up at the hotel, one of the beautiful hotels in Disney World, because she had to leave her room that they had already paid for because someone was sick in their family.
Okay.
You know, there are just so many things that
happen.
Like these marvelous systems of wheels and
Coincidences.
The greatest computers imaginable, and just so the timing is right. And how many times did I cross the street in New York and not many times, but someone said, be careful or something, and there was a car or something I hadn't seen.
Right.
Once a man actually pulled me.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I think many people have had that experience.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So we live in mystery, but we live in wonderment. Most of it is wonderment. It's really amazing.
Yeah. So I guess our wrapping up of the show is a wish for everybody to look at the secret mysteries and mystifications that are unveiled to us on Halloween. Getting back to nature, we've already talked about getting more into ourselves and true to ourselves since the pandemic. And also just looking for these things and thinking there's something, maybe it's a lost relative, maybe it's a guardian angel, maybe it's your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything that's the universe guarding over and watching us at times.
Yes, and you know, don't look to be scared. I mean, Halloween is great fun if you celebrate it. Don't look to be scared. Just, it's one more wonderment that we're allowed to enjoy by being alive, and make it fun, and make every day of your life something that's fun. Even if it, you know, even if it's some sort of vision you think about when you're driving in your car, or going to stand in line to whatever, you know,
Exactly.
go for a vision that feels good and brings back a laugh or just makes you feel whole, because we can do it. And it really helps. It really, really helps to get through the harder times, to practice loving not only ourselves, but our friends and everyone in our lives, and knowing that we can bring positive energy to each other. And Debbie has become a wonderful friend, and we love doing this. We love sharing it. And if you have ideas, let us know.
Yeah, and watch some of your old movies that you loved as a child. With Halloween, everybody has one little movie that scared them, but because you've already seen it, you know what the outcome is. So
Right.
watch it and go back in time
Yes.
and be a child for Halloween.
Yeah.
I think that's a great thing to do. And
Yes.
carve a pumpkin and don't eat too much of the candy you buy, because I don't think we're going to have that many trick-or-treaters this year. But anyway, so I guess that's it, Barb.
All right.
Now, always look on Facebook on our pages, because we will announce when we have a show. And, you know, as I said, if anybody can give us topics or ideas, we talk about the past, our past, the past of our area, the past of our nation. You know, interesting stuff.
It
So,
is.
Good
Yeah.
night, everybody.
Good
What do you think,
night.
Barb? That's our sign off. Right?
Well, good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. More information about Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, including her award-winning selfie films, The Truth for Girls, books, films, downloads, stage play, podcasts, and TED-style talks, including a library of information for women of all ages, is available at enchantedself.com. That's enchantedself.com.